Hello everyone, and welcome to Crime Whisper. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. I know many of you listen to these episodes to unwind or fall asleep, and I'm here to help with that. Before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us keep sharing these haunting stories with you. Also, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Now, take a deep breath, get comfortable, dim the lights, let your body relax as we step back into one of the most chilling unsolved cases in American history. Case 1. The Black Dahlia murder. It was January 1947 in the Leimert Park neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. A body had been found brutally mutilated and severed in half at the waist. The remains were later identified as belonging to 22-year-old Elizabeth Short. The press soon dubbed her the Black Dahlia, portraying her as a mysterious, seductive figure. The murder investigation was vast and complex, involving over 150 suspects. Although most were eventually cleared, none were ever charged, despite countless tips, confessions, and theories, including letters supposedly written by the killer. The case remains one of the most baffling and infamous cold cases in American history. Discovery of the body on the morning of January 15, 1947. A local housewife named Betty Bersinger was walking with her 3-year-old daughter near South Norton Avenue and 39th Street. As they strolled through the quiet residential street, Betty noticed something strange in an empty lot just off the sidewalk. At first glance, she assumed it was a discarded mannequin, a pale, broken figure laying in the dirt. But as she moved closer, she saw the horrifying truth. It was a woman's body, cut cleanly in two. Betty shielded her daughter's eyes and ran to the nearest home to call the police. Detectives Harry Hansen and Finis Brown were assigned to the case and arrived to find the scene already compromised, overrun with reporters and curious onlookers, trampling over what little evidence there may have been. One of the first reporters on site, Aggie Underwood of the Los Angeles Herald-Express, had already snapped photos of the body. The crime scene. The body had been posed deliberately. Elizabeth's arms were raised above her head at sharp angles, and her lower half had been placed about a foot away from her torso. Her legs were straight and splayed open, almost as if the killer wanted to put her on display. Her body had been completely drained of blood and washed clean. The autopsy later confirmed she had died elsewhere and was transported to the lot after death. A faint heel print and tire tracks were found nearby, along with a cement sack soaked in blood. But the most disturbing details were the mutilations. A Glasgow smile had been carved into her face, slashing 3-inch cuts from each corner of her mouth. Her breasts and thighs were slashed, and pieces of flesh had been removed. Rope marks around her wrists and ankles suggested she had been restrained and possibly tortured before her death. She was estimated to be around 5'6", 115 pounds, with recently dyed brown hair and nails bitten down to the quick. IDNTI with no ID on the body. Detectives turned to a then modern piece of technology. They lifted her fingerprints and passed them to the Los Angeles Examiner, who used their sound photo machine and early fax to send the prints to the FBI in Washington, D.C. Out of over 100 million records, the FBI made a match. The victim was Elizabeth Short, a 22-year-old, originally from Boston. She had previously been fingerprinted for a job at an Army base, and again after an arrest for underage drinking in Santa Barbara. The Examiner received her government application photo and immediately saw the story's potential. Young, beautiful, mysterious. This wasn't just a murder. It was about to become front-page news across the country. Exploitation by the pressing a highly unethical move. Reporters contacted Elizabeth's mother, Phoebe, in Boston. But instead of breaking the news of her daughter's murder, they told her Elizabeth had won a beauty contest. As Phoebe proudly shared personal details about her daughter, the journalists jotted down every word. Only after collecting enough information did they reveal the truth. Elizabeth was dead. Elizabeth's life before the MURDR, born July 29, 1924, in Hyde Park, Massachusetts. Elizabeth was one of 5 daughters. Her father, Cleo Short, owned a successful miniature golf business until the Great Depression wiped him out. Unable to face his failures, he faked his own death. Abandoning the family, Phoebe raised the girls on her own, working as a bookkeeper in a modest apartment. Elizabeth, nicknamed Beth by friends, was elegant and glamorous even as a child. She loved going to the movies, particularly the Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers films, and dreamed of a Hollywood life. But Beth also struggled with poor health. She had severe bronchitis and asthma, and underwent lung surgery at 15. Doctors advised that she winter in warmer climates to protect her lungs. So beginning in her teens, she often spent winters in Miami, where she worked as a waitress. She dropped out of high school, and in 1942, when her estranged father wrote to her from California, Elizabeth just ate and took a train cross-country to reconnect with him and start fresh on the West Coast. After arriving in California, Elizabeth Short reunited with her father Cleo, whom she hadn't seen since she was 6 years old. At the time, Cleo was working at the Mare Island Naval Shipyard near San Francisco Bay. Elizabeth had hoped the move would be her springboard into Hollywood, but her relationship with her father quickly soured. They were virtual strangers, and the years apart had built walls between them that neither could truly tear down. Cleo expected Elizabeth to behave like a live-in maid, doing the cooking, cleaning, and keeping house. But she was independent, a dreamer with no desire to be tied to domestic chores. The tension became too much, and in January 1943, just months after arriving, she moved out. Life during the WR soon after, Elizabeth landed a job working in the mailroom at the base exchange at Camp Cook, now known as Vandenberg Air Force Base, located about 2.5 hours north of Los Angeles. Camp Cook was filled with young soldiers, many of whom were preparing for deployment. Surrounded by regiments of restless, lonely men, Elizabeth quickly became the center of attention. Her striking looks and charm earned her the nickname Camp Cutie. She left a trail of admirers behind her, and some of the young men even told her she was destined to be a movie star. For a short time, she lived with a U.S. Army Air Force sergeant, but that relationship reportedly turned abusive. Not long after, she left Lompoc and moved to Santa Barbara. On September 23, 1943, she was arrested for underage drinking at a bar. Juvenile authorities sent her back to Massachusetts, but instead of going home, she detoured to Florida, drifting and do traming for the next few years. Elizabeth moved, often floating between Florida, Boston, and California. She worked various waitressing jobs to support herself and spent her nights dancing in jazz clubs, soaking in the lively nightlife. Elizabeth loved the music, the atmosphere, and the attention from men, and she was rarely alone, lest she chose to be. Then, on the last day of 1944, her life changed. While in Florida, she met a man who stood apart from the others. A love that never aired. Her name was Major Matthew Michael Gordon, Jr., a decorated Army Air Force officer with the elite Flying Tigers of the 2nd Air Commando Group. He was preparing for deployment to Southeast Asia. Elizabeth quickly fell for him. In a letter to her mother, she wrote, "I met someone New Year's Eve, a Major Matt Gordon. I'm so in love him. Sure it shows. He's wonderful, not like the others. He asked me to marry him while recovering from a plane crash in India." Gordon had indeed proposed to Elizabeth by mail, and she accepted, but fate intervened. In late August 1945, just days before Japan's official surrender, Elizabeth received a Western Union telegram not from her fiancé, but from his mother. "Matt killed in plane crash on way home from India. My sympathy is with you. Pray it isn't so." The man she had pinned her future on was gone, killed just 4 days before peace was declared. Elizabeth was devastated. She sank into a deep depression and clung to Gordon's memory, rereading his letters over and over. She wore his pilot wings pinned to her blouse and began collecting keepsakes for a hope chest, dreaming of the life she would never have. A life of shadows and ADMIR, or trying to move forward. She returned to Miami, where she distracted herself with a company of new admirers. She dated men of all kinds, young old soldiers, lawyers, but she especially favored those with money to spend. She understood the effect her beauty had on others, and she used it. Impeccably dressed in high heels and elegant outfits, she became a walking embodiment of 1940s glamour. She caught glances, turned heads, and accepted offers for dinners, gifts, even rent. Some gave her money just to spend time in her presence, although some later speculated she had worked as a prostitute. There is no reliable evidence to support those claims. Instead, she used her modest waitress income to build a wardrobe that expressed her style-tailored black suits, ruffled blouses, long gloves, and bold lipstick. Elizabeth Short had become her own creation, a woman who lived by her looks, charm, and independence. The return to Los Angeles by the summer of 1946. She returned to Southern California to be near another romantic interest lieutenant, Joseph Gordon Fickling, a handsome Air Force officer she had met 2 years earlier. Fickling, like many others, was taken by her, but their relationship was stormy. Letters seized by police after Elizabeth's death revealed a troubled connection. Fickling often expressed frustration with her, flirtatious behavior, and questioned whether he was truly important to her. Elizabeth, in turn, seemed unwilling or unable to reassure him. Eventually, Fickling moved north to work as a commercial airline pilot, but he continued to support her, even sending $100 just weeks before her death. On January 8, 1947, exactly 1 week before she was murdered, Elizabeth sent him her final letter. In her final letter to Lieutenant Fickling, Elizabeth told him she planned to move to Chicago, where she hoped to pursue a career as a fashion model. Meanwhile, her mother, Phoebe Short, was being contacted by journalists from the Los Angeles Examiner, but instead of delivering the tragic news right away, the reporters first coaxed personal details out of her pretending Elizabeth was a beauty contest winner. Only after extracting as much information as they could did they coldly inform her of her daughter's death. The newspaper then offered to fly Phoebe to Los Angeles, claiming it would help the investigation. In truth, it was a ploy and attempt to isolate her from other reporters and the police, so the Examiner could protect its exclusive coverage of the sensational case. Elizabeth's final months during the last 6 months of her life. Elizabeth Short had no permanent home. She floated from one place to another: cheap hotels, boarding houses, friends' apartments, anywhere she could find a place to sleep. She was often broke and couldn't afford rent, sneaking out of back doors to avoid paying. From mid-November to mid-December 1946, she worked briefly as a waitress while staying in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment behind the Florentine Gardens nightclub on Hollywood Boulevard. She shared that space with 8 other women waitresses, dancers, and telephone operators, most of whom had come to Los Angeles with hopes of making it in show business. Each tenant paid $1 per day for a bunk bed and a sliver of closet space. Even that proved too expensive for Elizabeth, one of her former roommates later told the LA Times. She was always out with a different boyfriend every night. She didn't have a job, she was always out prowling Hollywood Boulevard. Elizabeth was said to have very few close friends, preferring the fleeting company of strangers. She maintained only a small circle of acquaintances and was often described as a loner. The birth of a myth following her death. The media turned its gaze not only to the horror of the crime, but to the image of the victim. One article described her final outfitter: black tailored suit, a tight skirt, and a sheer blouse, and with that the press coined a name that would haunt the case forever: the Black Dahlia. Tabloid headlines portrayed her as a promiscuous seductress who lured men for money and pleasure. One newspaper called her an adventuress who prowled Hollywood Boulevard. Others suggested without evidence that she was a prostitute, adding to the mystery and scandal surrounding the case. Because of the brutal nature of the crime, rumors swirled that her death had been the work of a sex fiend or werewolf, a nickname adopted by the Herald Express. Interestingly, Elizabeth was never known as the Black Dahlia during her lifetime, at least not officially. Reporter Aggie Underwood, one of the first journalists on the scene, later claimed that the nickname came from an LAPD homicide detective. However, reporter Bevo Means, who interviewed employees at a Long Beach drugstore Elizabeth frequented, claimed the name originated there. According to Los Angeles Times copy editor Larry Hotnish, the nickname was a play on the popular 1946 noir film, The Blue Dahlia, and the name may have been given to her by local staff who admired her dramatic fashion sense and mystery. Regardless of its origin, the name stuck, and the media ran wild with it, publishing lurid headlines and breathless updates that captivated a nation still recovering from World War II. Autopsy and Forensics. In January 16, 1947, Los Angeles County Coroner Frederick Newbar performed Elizabeth Short's autopsy. She was described as 5'5", weighing around 115 pounds, with light blue eyes and dark brown hair. But there were also painful details revealed. Her teeth were in poor condition, badly decayed, and several were filled with wax. The most shocking revelation was the way her body had been severed. The killer had used a medical technique called a hemicorporectomy, a method taught in the 1930s that involves cutting the body in half at the lumbar spine. The precise nature of the cut suggested the killer had some anatomical knowledge, possibly a surgeon or someone with medical training. Her body had been thoroughly washed, likely with gasoline, in an effort to erase any forensic evidence. There was very little bruising around the incision, indicating that the dismemberment occurred after death. The autopsy revealed a deep and a quarter-inch laceration running vertically down her abdomen. The signature wounds on her face, known as a Glasgow smile, extended from the corners of her lips toward her ears, 3 inches on the right side, 2.5 on the left. There were ligature marks around her wrists, ankles, and neck, indicating she had been restrained, possibly tortured before being killed. There was also superficial tissue damage to her right breast, her left upper arm, and along her right forearm and side, though there was bruising on her skull. There were no fractures, suggesting blunt force trauma may have occurred, but not enough to break bone. This brutal, calculated dissection, the shocking posing of the body, the post-mortem cleaning, was not a crime of passion. It was methodical, cold, and it left a city both terrified and obsessed. To be continued in Part 3, the investigation and the suspects in the autopsy report. Bruising was noted on the front and right side of Elizabeth Short's scalp. Blunt force trauma, many years after the crime. One source falsely claimed that Short's body had been covered in cigarette burns inflicted while she was still alive. However, there is no mention of such injuries in the official autopsy, though she suffered horrific mutilations. There was no evidence of burning. Another disturbing rumor arose from a misinterpreted comment allegedly made by Coroner Frederick Newbar. It was claimed that Short had been forced to consume feces based on stomach content analysis. This accusation, however, has been widely disputed and is not supported by the official autopsy findings. What was confirmed were signs of significant trauma, a small amount of bleeding on the right side of her head, consistent with multiple blows. Newbar ultimately listed the cause of death as massive internal hemorrhaging caused by blunt force trauma to the head, and shock due to the extreme facial injuries. The autopsy also noted that Short's anal canal was dilated about 1 3/4 inches, leading some to speculate she had been sexually assaulted. However, forensic testing found no traces of sperm on her body, indicating no confirmed sexual activity or rape. controversy and misinformation. In a post-autopsy conversation with Herald Express reporter Bevo Means, a deputy coroner reportedly claimed that Short may not have been sexually active due to what he described as small genitalia. The autopsy report did mention a small uterus, but gave no indication that her reproductive organs were anything other than anatomically normal. Still, this unverified remark triggered widespread rumors that Elizabeth Short was a lesbian or had a congenital disorder called gonadal dysgenesis, often referred to as infantile genitalia. These baseless assumptions prompted the LAPD to start investigating gay bars across Los Angeles shortly after the discovery of her body. Meanwhile, detectives were working tirelessly on the ground. Around 40 LAPD officers conducted an extensive search of the area where the body was found. They canvassed homes, searched dumpsters, checked laundromats for blood-stained clothing, and interviewed local residents, but turned up no significant leads. Family ties and missed connections. Father, Cleo Short, was eventually located living just 3 miles from where her body had been dumped. He told police he hadn't seen his daughter in over 3 years and remained bitter over her refusal to perform household chores when she had briefly lived with him. When the coroner asked Cleo to identify Elizabeth's body, he refused. A witness, Emerge's one nearby resident, offered a potentially critical lead. On the early morning of January 15, 1947, the day the body was discovered, he had been driving to the empty lot to dispose of lawn clippings when he noticed a man standing next to a parked sedan with the rear passenger door open. The neighbor's arrival seemed to startle the man, who quickly peered into his car window and then got in and drove away. Police tracked the vehicle's owner to a nearby restaurant where he worked, but the man was eventually cleared of involvement. The medical student theory investigators were particularly struck by the surgical precision of the body's dissection. The clean hemicorporectomy suggested that the killer might have had medical training. This led authorities to suspect a doctor, or perhaps a medical student. The FBI persuaded the University of Southern California, located near where the body was found, to provide a list of its medical students, hoping a connection might surface. J. Edgar Hoover's FBI office also received a flood of letters from citizens convinced they knew who the killer was, more often using the murder as an excuse to report people they disliked. One woman wrote in May 1947, "This man swindled $75 out of me, promising to make me a movie star. I think he's the killer." A massive, chaotic investigation. The early stages of the investigation involved over 750 law enforcement personnel, 400 sheriff's deputies, 250 California State Patrol officers, and more than 100 LAPD detectives. City Councilman Lloyd G. Davis offered a $10,000 reward, a massive sum at the time, for any information that would lead to the capture of Elizabeth Short's killer. But the case was quickly overwhelmed not just by false leads and public hysteria, but by the press. Detective Finis Brown, one of the lead investigators, later blamed the Los Angeles media for interfering with the investigation. He accused reporters of publishing rumors, half-truths, and fabrications that muddied the waters and misled the public. Confessions flood in, as often happens in high-profile cases. Confessions began pouring in. Dozens of people came forward claiming responsibility for the murder. Some were clearly mentally unstable. Others were simply seeking their moment in the spotlight. By the end of January 1947, police had received more than 30 confessions, of which held up under scrutiny. Surprisingly, the first people to claim responsibility were women. One of them, Minnie Sepulveda, phoned LAPD's university station from a bar and declared, "I just stabbed a girl. I killed her." Her confession, like all the others that followed, turned out to be false. To be continued in Part 4, Suspects, Theories, and the Killer's Letters. Despite the large number of confessions, most were quickly dismissed. a particularly outlandish claim from a woman named Emily Williams, a former member of the Women's Army Corps who suffered from an unspecified mental illness. Another call came to LAPD, homicide from 33-year-old Daniel Voorhees. He claimed he had murdered Elizabeth Short and later surrendered himself to police. But when pressed for details, Voorhees refused to elaborate on Lee, saying he had dated Short in 1941. The timeline didn't match up, and he was promptly released then. There was Marvin Hart, a 35-year-old physical culture instructor who was arrested after telling a taxi driver he had just killed a man. Hart had lived in the same building as Elizabeth Short and had dated her a few times, but upon investigation, he had a solid alibi for the night of the murder and was cleared. One of the more compelling suspects was Joseph Dumb, a handsome corporal and combat veteran. Dumb returned from leave with blood-stained trousers and newspaper clippings about the Black Dahlia in his pockets. He confessed to killing Elizabeth, but claimed he had suffered a blackout after dating her. His story eventually fell apart, and he was referred to an army psychiatrist. So many individuals came forward, each one a distraction. Detective Harry Hansen later told the press how valuable manpower was wasted chasing false leads and verifying hoaxes. Letters poured in from pranksters all across the country. From the Bronx to El Paso, detectives interviewed more than 20 of Elizabeth's former boyfriends, but none provided any actionable leads. Many investigators began to suspect that Short's killer wasn't someone she knew at all, but a stranger, a chance encounter, a predator. They began interviewing thousands of people, anyone who had even a passing connection to her. Hundreds of people would eventually confess to the Black Dahlia murder. Hundreds more pointed fingers at friends, neighbors, any family members. It's amazing how many people offered up a relative as the killer, said Sergeant John P. St. John, who worked the case until his retirement. Every tip had to be logged, verified, and followed up, each one adding to the ever-growing mountain of dead. Ends not the final days of Elizabeth Short. Investigators retraced Elizabeth's final days, hoping to uncover her last movements. One suspect emerged, someone believed to be the last person to see her alive. But perhaps the most chilling lead came years later, pointing to a man who, decades after her murder, would be named the prime suspect in the case. Enter Dr. George Hodel. In the late 1940s, Dr. George Hodel was a prominent and successful physician, living in a grand Spanish-style home in the Hollywood Hills. But his life would come under dark scrutiny when, in 1949, his 14-year-old daughter Tamar accused him of molestation and incest, claiming he had impregnated her and forced her to undergo a back-alley abortion. During the 3-week trial that followed, witnesses testified to disturbing events at Hodel's Franklin Avenue residence, alleging that sex acts had taken place in front of guests. Despite this, George Hodel was acquitted of the charges and walked free. Still, Hodel was now firmly on the radar of LAPD investigators. Given their theory that Elizabeth Short's killer may have had medical expertise, Hodel, a doctor with surgical knowledge, became a strong person of interest. Wiretapped and watched from February 18th to March 27th, 1950, the LAPD placed Dr. Hodel under surveillance. Detectives wiretapped his home, hoping he might speak openly about the Black Dahlia case. The tapes were mostly mundane, but in one conversation, Hodel made several disturbing statements while speaking to a man referred to only as the Baron. He can be heard saying, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead. Maybe I did kill my secretary. That secretary, Ruth Spaulding, had died in 1945 under mysterious circumstances. Her death was officially ruled a suicide, but Hodel's comments cast it in a more sinister light. Even more chilling, some of the recordings captured the screams of a woman inside the house, followed by silence. Despite the disturbing nature of the audio, no attempt was made by officers to intervene, and the identity or fate of that woman remains unknown. Hodel was also suspected in other murders, including that of Louise Springer, who was strangled in her car in 1949. But it was the Black Dahlia connection that remained the most shocking. An escape to the Pacific just as pressure was building. Hodel fled. In late March 1950, he abruptly left Los Angeles, first traveling to Hawaii, then settling in the Philippines, where he would remain for decades. The trail went cold, but inside the Los Angeles County District Attorney's vault, a confidential file marked George Hodel, Black Dahlia, continued to grow, reopened by his own son in 2003. Long after George Hodel's death, that file was discovered. It confirmed what many had long suspected. Hodel was the prime suspect in Elizabeth Short's murder. The case took an even stranger turn when George's own son, Steve Hodel, a former LAPD homicide detective, began an independent investigation into his father. Steve published extensive research linking George Hodel not only to the Black Dahlia murder, but to multiple unsolved homicides in the Los Angeles area, and even suggested his father might be the notorious Zodiac killer. Lieutenant Frank Jemison of the district attorney's office once said, "We know who the Black Dahlia killer was. He was a doctor, but we didn't have enough to put him away." To be continued in Part 5, The Killer's Letters, Legacy, and Cultural Impact. The man suspected by some of being Elizabeth Short's killer was Dr. George Hodel. Years later, Deputy District Attorney Steve Kay, who reviewed the case in depth, gave a striking opinion. The case, in his eyes, had been solved. But back in January 1947, Elizabeth Short had just returned to Los Angeles following a short trip to San Diego. She had been in the company of Robert Red Manley, a 25-year-old married salesman. Manley, known for his bright auburn hair, told reporters that he first spotted Elizabeth alone on a street corner in San Diego. She stood out beautiful, with no apparent destination. At first, she ignored him. He pulled up beside her, spoke gently, and reassured her that he meant no harm. Eventually, she accepted his offer for a ride. At the time, Elizabeth had been staying with a kind-hearted family who had taken her in after discovering her trying to spend the night in a 24-hour movie theater. But her hosts grew frustrated with her late-night outings and idle behavior during the day. They asked her to leave in early January. That's when Manley came into the picture. The two stayed overnight at a motel, but Manley claimed they didn't sleep together. Elizabeth slept fully clothed. The next day, January 9th, he drove her to Los Angeles. There, he helped her check her luggage at the downtown bus depot. She told him she planned to visit her sister in Berkeley, but first, she was meeting someone at the Biltmore Hotel. Manley walked her into the lobby around 6:30 p.m., then returned to San Diego. According to hotel staff, Elizabeth was seen using the lobby's phone. The Biltmore, built in the 1920s, was one of the most glamorous hotels in Los Angeles. Its hand-painted ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and marble floors stood in tragic contrast to the abandoned lot where her body would be found 1 week later. Shortly after leaving the Biltmore, Elizabeth was allegedly seen at the Crown Grill Cocktail Lounge, located at 754 South Olive Street, not far from the hotel. It would be her last known sighting, alive. 10 days after her mutilated body was discovered, one of her black open-toe pumps and her patent leather handbag were found atop a trash bin in an alley near 1819 East 25th Street, miles from where her body had been dumped. Robert Manley was brought in to identify the items. He confirmed the shoe was one he had purchased for her in San Diego, and recognized the handbag still saturated with Elizabeth's strong perfume, which had lingered in his car after their trip. All of these sordid details were devoured by Los Angeles's 5 daily newspapers, each vying to break the next major development. Then, on January 21st, a man claiming to be the killer telephoned James Richardson, the editor of the Los Angeles Examiner. He praised the newspaper's coverage and said he would eventually turn himself in, but wanted to give police time to catch him first. Before hanging up, he added, "Expect some souvenirs of Beth Short in the mail." 3 days later, on the same day Elizabeth's shoe and handbag were found, a manila envelope addressed to the Examiner and other local papers arrived. It reeked of gasoline, suggesting the sender had tried to wipe away fingerprints, just as the killer had washed Elizabeth's body. The front of the envelope had letters cut and pasted from newspaper clippings. It read, "Here is Dahlia's belongings. Letter to follow." Inside were several of Elizabeth's personal effects, her birth certificate, business cards, her social security card, a newspaper obituary of Matt Gordon, her deceased fiancé, several names scribbled on scraps of paper, photographs, and an address book embossed with the name Mark Hansen, though the sender had made efforts to remove fingerprints. A few smudged prints were recovered and sent to the FBI. Unfortunately, they were damaged in transit and became unusable. Mark Hansen, whose name appeared on the address book, was a wealthy nightclub and theater owner in Los Angeles. Elizabeth had reportedly stayed at his home with friends. Hansen recognized the items as hers and admitted he had known her. One of Elizabeth's former roommates suggested she had recently rejected Hansen's sexual advances and proposed this as a potential motive. Naturally, Hansen became a suspect, but he was eventually cleared by police. Robert Red Manley, the last known person to see Elizabeth alive, also underwent heavy scrutiny. He passed multiple polygraph tests and was cleared. Hansen's address book contained 75 men's names, and police tracked down every single one. Most gave the same story. "We met Elizabeth, went for drinks or dinner, and never saw her again after she turned down a romantic advance." Then, on March 14, 1947, a strange discovery was made. A shoe, stuffed with paper, was found inside a pile of men's clothing near the ocean, at the foot of Breeze Avenue in Venice. Inside that shoe was a note, tucked inside a pile of men's clothing at the edge of the ocean. Near the foot of Breeze Avenue in Venice, a torn scrap of paper was found, an apparent suicide note. It read, "To whom it may concern, I have waited for the police to capture me for the Black Dahlia killing, but they have not. I am too much of a coward to turn myself in, so this is the best way out for me. I couldn't help myself. For that, or this. Sorry, Mary." The clothing, first spotted by a beach caretaker and reported to lifeguard Captain John Dillon, was handed over to police. It included a coat and trousers made of blue herringbone tweed, a brown and white t-shirt, white underwear, tan socks, and moccasin-style shoes, size 8. None of it yielded a clue to the identity of the note's author. Whoever he was, he vanished without a trace. In the days and weeks that followed, more letters trickled in, some to the LAPD, others to the Los Angeles Examiner and Herald Express. One claimed the sender would surrender. When police waited at the designated place and time, no one showed. Another letter followed, stating simply, "Changed my mind. You would not give me a square deal." In total, 13 letters were received, some handwritten, others assembled from cut-and-paste newspaper letters, many signed by someone calling themselves the Black Dahlia Avenger. Whether any were authentic is still debated. Another major complication in the investigation was the so-called missing week between January 9th, when Elizabeth Short was last seen alive, and January 15th, when her body was discovered. Numerous tips and alleged sightings came in from people claiming to have seen her, but none were ever confirmed. Most turned out to be mistaken identity, media fabrication, or pure fantasy. One report in the Herald Express claimed she had been murdered at the Astor Motel. The motel's owners had indeed discovered a room soaked in blood and feces the morning her body was found. Though initially considered a lead, the LAPD later dismissed it. In 1949, then-Chief William A. Wharton formally denied the Astor Motel had any connection to the case. What we do know is this: After Elizabeth Short was dropped off at the Biltmore Hotel by Robert Red Manley, her trail goes cold. At some point during those 6 days, she crossed paths with her killer, a person who subjected her to unimaginable brutality, dismembered her, and left her remains displayed deliberately, almost theatrically, in a vacant lot. But Short's murder wasn't the only crime of its kind during that time. In the months surrounding her death, a string of violent murders targeting women plagued Southern California. On February 10, 1947, just weeks after Elizabeth's body was found, the nude, beaten body of 44-year-old Jean French was discovered in West Los Angeles. Written across her stomach in lipstick were the words F*** UBD***, and the initials text below it. Some believed BD stood for Black Dahlia, and that this was the work of the same killer. 1 month later, Evelyn Winters, 43, was found bludgeoned and strangled to death in a vacant lot near an abandoned rail yard in Norwalk. In April 1947, Laura Eliza was discovered in an oil field in Long Beach. The 36-year-old had been sexually assaulted, struck in the head, strangled with a belt, and thrown from a car. Newspapers dubbed her killer the Mad Werewolf and speculated he was responsible for both her death and Elizabeth Short's. The list grew. Investigators at least questioned connections between the Black Dahlia case and the murders of Georgette Bauerdorf, found face down in her West Hollywood bathtub in 1944, Gladys Landon, killed in July 1946. Jean Spangler, a 26 actress who vanished in October 1949. Her purse was found in Griffith Park with a cryptic note inside that read, "Kirk, can't wait any longer. Going to see Dr. Scott. It will work best this way while Mother is away." The media dubbed these cases with their own ghoulish nicknames. The Red Lipstick Murder, Jean French. The Red Ribbon Murder, Olive Laura Hillgage. The Green Twig Murder, Louise Springer. The Happy Widow Murder, Mimi Boumhor. August 1949, some researchers and detectives went further, looking back to San Diego, where Elizabeth had stayed with Red Manley before her death. There, a disturbing pattern emerged. Between 1931 and 1947, at least 8 women were murdered in gruesome fashion. In one case, the body of 10-year-old Virginia Brooks was found stuffed in a burlap sack. In another, 17-year-old Louise Tuber was discovered hanging from a tree, beaten and posed to suggest a suicide. None of these cases were ever conclusively connected to Short's murder, but they painted a grim picture. The 1930s and 40s were dangerous years for women in California. Meanwhile, in Cleveland, another series of unsolved killings between 1934 and 1938 bore eerie similarities to the Black Dahlia case. The press called the murderer the Cleveland Torso Killer, or the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. At least 13 victims were found dismembered, often with surgical precision. Few were ever identified. Detective Peter Murillo, who investigated the Kingsbury Run murders, believed the same person may have killed Elizabeth Short. The prime suspect in that case was Dr. Francis E. Sweeney, a surgeon with known mental illness, but he was never charged. Even more chilling were the lipstick murders of 1945 and 1946 in Chicago. These involved the deaths of several young girls, the most notorious being 6-year-old Suzanne Degnan. At one scene, a message had been scrawled in lipstick on the wall. Elizabeth Short, it was rumored, had taken an interest in these murders. Shortly before her death, a teenager, William Aarons, was arrested and convicted of those crimes. He later claimed he had been tortured into confessing, raising further doubts. By spring 1947, with the Dahlia case growing colder by the day, the LAPD convened a grand jury in September 1949 to investigate failures and inadequacies in how the murder and the many leads that followed had been handled. In the homicide division of the LAPD, an unsettling number of murder cases involving women and children remained unsolved during the late 1940s. Just months after Elizabeth Short's death, the department came under intense scrutiny again, this time not for incompetence, but for corruption. The Brenda Allen scandal exposed a deeply rooted alliance between Los Angeles law enforcement and organized vice. Allen, a powerful madam with a roster of over 114 working girls, had been bribing police officers to keep her brothels operating without interference. The fallout was devastating. The investigation into Allen's dealings revealed a pattern of police protection, payoffs, and systemic rot. LAPD Chief Clemence B. Horrell was forced to resign. The department, once again, found itself under the microscope, this time before a grand jury investigating corruption. Mere months after the Black Dahlia proceedings, the two scandals shared a common theme: institutional failure. In Elizabeth Short's case, the grand jury found no evidence that she had ever worked as a prostitute, despite the rampant rumors circulated by the press. These falsehoods, many accusing her of being a call girl or party girl, helped create a sensational, distorted image of the Black Dahlia that lingers even today. Among dozens of names floated during the investigation, 5 prime suspects were included in a formal report submitted to the grand jury. However, none were indicted. As the case remained officially open, it was only years later that one of those suspects was revealed to be Dr. George Hodow, the man now widely considered to be the leading suspect in Short's murder. As the investigation wound down, detectives turned their attention to Elizabeth's past, tracing her steps through Massachusetts, Florida, Texas, and New Orleans, but no new breakthroughs were uncovered. On the day of her funeral, Elizabeth Short was quietly laid to rest in Oakland's Mountain View Cemetery. Only 6 family members attended. Unbeknownst to them, plainclothes officers were also present, hoping the killer might appear to pay a final, twisted farewell. No such figure ever came. Just 2 weeks after her death, on February 2nd, 1947, Assemblyman C. Don Field proposed a groundbreaking bill calling for a sex offender registry in California. It would go on to become the first law of its kind in the United States. Despite interviewing over 150 suspects, no one was ever charged in Short's murder. Even George Hodow, long suspected by authorities, and his own son, eluded justice. After fleeing the U.S., he lived abroad for decades. Much of the key physical evidence, including the infamous letters sent by the purported killer, has since been lost. The FBI has since declassified over 200 pages related to its investigation, but the mystery remains. With her dyed hair, alabaster skin, vivid red lipstick, and hauntingly pale blue eyes, Elizabeth Short became a tragic icon of 1940s Los Angeles noir. The press turned her into a myth, often twisting the truth to craft a narrative filled with sex, beauty, and violence, the essential ingredients for America's most infamous unsolved murder case. 2. The Zodiac Killer, one of the most infamous serial killers in American history. The Zodiac Killer is believed to have terrorized the San Francisco Bay Area from 1968 to 1970. Though many suspect his crimes began years earlier, his victims were often young couples, ambushed in secluded areas, shot or stabbed to death, with no pattern aside from their vulnerability. And unlike most killers, the Zodiac reveled in the spotlight. He taunted authorities and newspapers with letters, cryptograms, and riddles, some of which remain unsolved to this day. By 1974, the Zodiac claimed to have killed 37 people, though only a handful of murders have been definitively linked to him. After that, the letters stopped. No more bodies, no more clues. Many believe he either died, was institutionalized, or is still alive, simply choosing silence. But long before the name Zodiac entered the national consciousness, a brutal killing in Riverside may have marked his first strike. On October 30th, 1966, 18-year-old Sherry Jo Bates was found murdered near the Riverside City College library. Her throat had been slashed so deeply she was nearly decapitated. Her chest, back and arms bore multiple stab wounds. Investigators later discovered that someone had disabled her car, waited for her to return, and then attacked. Almost a month later, on November 29th, the local paper and police received identical anonymous letters claiming responsibility. In April 1967, another letter was sent, this time bearing a strange symbol that resembled a Z, beginning with a squiggle, oddly similar to what would later become the Zodiac's calling card. The envelope was also overstamped, a habit shared by the Zodiac in his later mailings. Could Sherry Jo Bates have been his first victim? The Zodiac's confirmed spree began on December 20th, 1968. That night, 17-year-old David Faraday and 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen drove to a remote lover's lane near Lake Herman Road. They never made it home. Sometime after 10:30 p.m., a car pulled up beside their vehicle. The driver got out and opened fire first from behind, then up close. Betty Lou was shot 5 times in the back as she ran, dying instantly. David was shot in the head at point-blank range. Witnesses earlier that night had spotted a light-colored hardtop Chevrolet Impala parked nearby. A second couple in the area reported a suspicious vehicle that had backed toward them, its driver watching intently. They fled the area in fear. Police would later collect shell casings at the scene, confirming the weapon used was likely a .22 caliber handgun or rifle loaded with LR ammunition. It was the beginning of a pattern, one marked by intimate violence, precise planning, and cryptic communication that would haunt California for years. Case 2. The Zodiac Killer Part O. Ani the Killer struck again, just 6 months after the murders of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. On the night of July 4th, 1969, just after midnight, 19-year-old Michael Mageau and 22-year-old Darlene Farron were sitting in Farron's car at the Blue Rock Springs Golf Course in Vallejo, California, a well-known spot for young couples. According to Mageau, Farron had picked him up around 11:30 p.m. initially. They went out to get food, but Farron said she had something to talk about. Instead, they drove to the quiet park. Once there, she switched off the car's engine and headlights, leaving only the radio playing softly. A few minutes later, several cars came and went, their passengers laughing and setting off firecrackers. Then, around midnight, a brown Ford Mustang or Chevy Corvair pulled up beside them. The driver sat for a moment, headlights off, before pulling away. Mageau asked Farron if she recognized the man. She replied, "Oh, never mind," before he could question her further. The car was gone, but 10 minutes later, it returned. This time, the car parked behind them, headlights on. The driver exited, holding a flashlight at arm's length to obscure his face. Mageau, thinking it might be a police officer, reached for his ID, but instead of identifying himself, the man raised a 9mm handgun and opened fire. Bullets tore through the window. Mageau was shot in the face and chest. Farron was struck in the arms and back. Mageau tried to crawl into the back seat, but was hit again, this time in the leg. As the attacker turned to leave, he heard Mageau moan. The man returned and fired 2 more shots at each victim before calmly walking back to his car and driving off into the night. Mageau, despite being seriously wounded, managed to turn on the car's hazard lights and fall out of the passenger side door, where he saw the shooter's vehicle leaving the scene. Shortly after, a group of teenagers discovered the couple and called police. Darlene Farron died in the ambulance on the way to Kaiser Foundation Hospital. She was pronounced dead at 12:38 a.m. Mageau was rushed into surgery and survived, though he would suffer from chronic pain for years to come. At 12:40 a.m., just minutes after the shooting, an anonymous mail caller contacted the Vallejo Police Department. The voice, calm and without accent, spoke to dispatcher Nancy Slover. "I want to report a double murder. If you go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to the public park, you'll find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." The call was traced to a payphone just blocks from the police station. The man had clearly planned his escape and knew how to mislead. Mago later described the killer as a white male, 5'8", heavyset but not obese, weighing around 195 pounds, with a broad, prominent face. His description became one of the only solid leads investigators had. Authorities initially speculated that Farron may have known her killer. Friends claimed she'd been receiving silent phone calls, and that a man had possibly been stalking her in the weeks leading up to her death. A local man was identified as a possible suspect, but was soon ruled out after providing a solid alibi. Then, on July 31st, 1969, a major development shook the investigation. 3 letters, each addressed to a different newspaper, the San Francisco Chronicle, San Francisco Examiner, and Vallejo Times-Heralder, arrived in their newsrooms. The author claimed responsibility for both attacks: the murder of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen in December, and the recent shooting of Michael Mago and Darlene Farron. Each letter included 1/3 of a cryptic cipher. The author demanded that all 3 ciphers be published on the front pages of the newspapers. If his demand wasn't met, he threatened to embark on a weekend killing spree. The killer ended his letters with a name the world would never forget: Zodiac. Case 2. The Zodiac Killer Part TWO. Just days after the brutal murder of Darlene Farron and the wounding of Michael Mago, the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Examiner, and the San Francisco Chronicle each received nearly identical letters. Each envelope contained a 1/3 segment of a cryptogram, and each was signed off with a now-infamous symbol, a circle with a cross through it, the mark that would soon come to define the Zodiac Killer. The killer demanded that each part of the cipher be published on the front page of each newspaper by August 1st, or else he promised to go on a killing rampage that very weekend. He threatened to cruise around, picking off all stray people or couples that are alone, vowing to kill more than a dozen if his words were ignored. Each letter revealed details of the crimes that only the killer and the police would have known, such as the brand of ammunition, the number of shots fired, and the precise positioning of the victims' bodies. Here's an excerpt from the letter sent to the Vallejo Times-Herald. "Dear editor, I am the killer of the 2 teenagers last Christmas at Lake Herman and the girl last 4th of July. To prove this, I shall state some facts which only I and the police know. Christmas, brand name of ammo. Super X 10 shots fired. Boy was on back feet to car. Girl was lying on right side. Feet to west, 4th of July. Girl was wearing patterned pants. Boy was also shot in knee and name of ammo, Western." He ended with the demand to print the cipher and a warning: "If you do not do this, I will go on a kill rampage Friday night that will last the whole weekend until I have killed over a dozen people." While the killer claimed to have used a 9mm Luger, investigators believed the gun was actually a Browning high power, which used 13-round factory magazines, contradicting the killer's account. Still, the urgency was real. By August 2nd, all 3 newspapers had complied and published the cryptograms. In response, Vallejo Police Chief Jack Stiltz issued a public request for the letter writer to send additional proof of his identity. The killer responded just 2 days later. This time, the San Francisco Examiner received a 3-page handwritten letter, in which the killer officially named himself. "Dear editor, this is the Zodiac speaking. In answer to your asking for more details about the good times I have had in Vallejo, I shall be very happy to supply even more material." He continued by describing the murders in detail. He claimed that on the night of July 4th, Mago was sitting in the front seat, and Farron's car window was already down, so he didn't need to open the door. He wrote, "When I fired the first shot at his head, he leaped backwards and spoiled my aim. He ended up on the back seat, then the floor, bouncing around very violently with his legs. That's how I shot him in the knee." He also corrected the public account, stating he did not speed away with squealing tires, but instead drove off slowly to avoid attention. Zodiac went on to brag about how he managed to aim in the dark by taping a flashlight to the barrel of his gun. He explained that the beam created a central black spot on the target, allowing him to fire accurately, just like spraying with a water hose. He wrote. At the end of the letter, he added a complaint. I was not happy to see that I did not get front page coverage. The Zodiac's ego was now fully on display. Forensic analysis of the letter revealed that it had been written on Woolworth's Fifth Avenue brand notepaper, and latent fingerprints were found, though they have never been matched to any known suspect. Then, a breakthrough. A local school teacher, Donald Harden, and his wife Betty, cracked the Zodiac's 408-character cipher and submitted their solution to the Vallejo police on August 8th. The decoded message was chilling. I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest, because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is that when I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and all the people I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name, because you will try to slow me down, or stop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife. The message ended with 18 mysterious symbols, which to this day remain undeciphered. The next day, the cipher solution was printed by both the Chronicle and the Times-Herald. On August 10th, an anonymous letter was sent to Vallejo Police Sergeant John Lynch. Enclosed was a typed key to the cipher, accompanied by a note on a 3x5 index card. Dear Sergeant Lynch, I hope the enclosed key will prove to be beneficial to you in connection with the cipher letter writer. Working puzzles, cryptograms, and word puzzles is one of my pleasures. Please forgive the absence of my name, as I do not wish to have it in the papers or spoken aloud by mistake. With best wishes, concerned citizen. The FBI reviewed the key and concluded it was generally valid and substantially accurate, but the mystery deepened. The Zodiac killer had made contact, provided proof, revealed his twisted philosophy, and was just getting started. Case 2. The Zodiac Killer Part 3. Some believed the mysterious concerned citizen who mailed in a cipher key had simply read Donald and Betty Harden's decryption in the paper. Whether the card was a hoax or an innocent contribution, one usable palm print was recovered from the envelope, but, to this day, it has never been matched to a suspect. Then, just 2 months later, the Zodiac struck again. The Lake Berryessa attack. It was Saturday, September 27, 1969. 3 young women from Unwind arrived at Lake Berryessa, a picturesque lake in Napa County, about 60 miles northeast of San Francisco. At around 3 p.m., they parked near the lake and soon noticed a man in a light blue 1966 two-door Chevrolet with California plates pulling into the lot. He drove past, paused, then reversed, and parked right next to them. The man seemed to be looking down, perhaps reading something. Unnerved, the women walked down to the shoreline and lay out in the sun. For the next 30 minutes, they noticed the man was watching them. He was later described as clean-cut and nice-looking, around 6 feet tall, weighing over 200 pounds, with short dark hair parted to one side. He wore a black short-sleeved sweatshirt over a t-shirt and dark pants. After watching them and smoking several cigarettes, the man stood up and wandered off. When the women returned to their car around 4:30 p.m., the stranger and his vehicle were gone. But they weren't the only visitors to Lake Berryessa that day. A young couple, Cecilia Shepard and Brian Hartnell, both students from Pacific Union College, had made a spontaneous decision to spend the afternoon at the lake. They chose to picnic at Twin Oak Ridge, a small peninsula on the western shore. As the sun began to set, Cecilia noticed a man in the distance. He appeared to be in his 30s, around 5 feet 8 inches to 6 feet tall, with dark, greasy hair combed neatly. At first, Hartnell thought nothing of him, but before the man got too close, he disappeared behind some trees, and when he emerged, he was no longer just a man. Now, He was wearing a costume. He had donned a homemade black hoods, square-cornered and crudely sewn with cutouts for the eyes and mouth. A pair of dark sunglasses were fastened to the inside of the hood, further concealing his face. On his chest, stitched onto a bib-like garment, was the same circle cross symbol that had accompanied all the zodiac's letters. At his waist was a belt, carrying a long knife in a wooden sheath and an empty gun holster. In his hand, he held a pistol. Approaching the couple, he calmly demanded, "I want your money and your car keys. I want your car to go to Mexico." Brian Hartnell handed over his Volkswagen keys and the coins in his pocket. The stranger took the coins, but oddly set the keys on the picnic basket. Trying to reason with him, Hartnell offered assistance. The man coldly replied, "No, time's running short." He claimed to be an escaped convict from the Pacific Northwest, saying he had killed a guard and stolen a car. Hartnell remembered the man referencing either Montana or Colorado, but later couldn't recall exactly. Most believe he mentioned Deer Lodge, Montana town with a prison, but no such escape or murder had taken place. It was, most likely, just a ruse. As Hartnell continued to talk, trying to stall, the man pulled clothesline from his belt and ordered Cecilia to tie up Brian. When Hartnell protested, the stranger shouted, "Get down, right now." Cecilia threw her purse aside and bound Brian as instructed. The man then tightened the knots himself, his hands visibly shaking. Once both victims were secured, he made a chilling declaration, "I'm going to have to stab you people." Brian tried to protect Cecilia and pleaded, "Stab me first." The stranger simply replied, "I'll do just that." He drew what looked like a foot-long double-edged bayonet, a crude, damaged weapon with makeshift repairs. He stabbed Brian 6 times, then turned to Cecilia and stabbed her 10 times. Her wounds would later prove fatal, leaving them for dead. The killer walked to Hartnell's car, pulled out a black marker, and wrote on the door, "The call to police at 7:40 p.m. Over an hour later, a call came in to Napa police. The voice on the line was calm and deliberate. "I want to report a murder. No, a double murder. They are 2 miles north of park headquarters." They were in a white Volkswagen Carmen Ghia. When the operator asked the caller's name, he quietly added, "I'm the one that did it." Then the line went dead. The call was traced to a payphone near a car wash at 1231 Main Street, just blocks from the Napa Police Department. Evidence left behind at the crime scene. Police found a clear trail of footprints later identified as being made by Wing Walker military boots, size 10.5. The deep impressions suggested the killer was heavyset. A palm print was lifted from the phone receiver, but during the collection process, the evidence technician smudged it, rendering it useless. Around 6:30 p.m., just before the attack, a local dentist and his son reported seeing a man matching the Zodiac's description walking near the lake. He turned and walked away when he noticed he'd been seen. However, this encounter occurred too far north from the attack site, and no vehicle was seen. Police doubted it was the same man. Doubts and deviations later. Some questioned whether the Lake Berryessa attack was truly the work of the Zodiac. The crime involved close contact, verbal interaction, and stabbing, a stark contrast to his usual ambush-style shootings. Still, the handwriting on Hartnell's car appeared to match the Zodiac's style, and the presence of the cross circle symbol left little doubt in the minds of most investigators. If this was a copycat, it was a disturbingly accurate one. But if it was the Zodiac, then he was evolving, becoming bolder, more theatrical, and more dangerous with each passing crime. The Zodiac Killer Part 4. Escalation and the mistaken identity, despite the ominous similarities. The Lake Berryessa attack has never been definitively confirmed as a Zodiac crime. The killer never claimed responsibility in any follow-up letters, unlike with the Vallejo and San Francisco incidents, and the method of attack binding the victims, using a knife instead of a gun, and lingering to stage a scene was a clear departure from the Zodiac's previous behavior. During this assault, the attacker engaged in a lengthy conversation with his victims. He concocted a story about escaping from a prison in the Pacific Northwest, needing money and a car to flee to Mexico. But after binding the couple, he left Brian Hartnell's keys and Cecilia Shepard's wallet untouched. It appeared the demands had only been a ruse, and yet despite this drastic change in modus operandi, the killer still marked Hartnell's car door with the signature cross-circle symbol and a chronology of his prior attacks. Curiously, the killer omitted a possible earlier crime in Riverside, leading some to believe that Zodiac was not involved in that case after all. Was Lake Berryessa ritualistic? Some investigators and theorists have speculated that the knife attack and the use of the hood may have held symbolic or ritualistic meaning to the killer. The reason for wearing the handmade four-cornered hood remains unclear. It was elaborate and distinctive, perhaps designed to terrify the victims. But if the intent was simply to hide his face, why not wear a ski mask or more common disguise? The Zodiac went to great lengths to craft that costume, indicating premeditation. Brian Hartnell later described how the killer seemed to lose control, especially during the frenzied stabbing of Cecilia Shepard. The choice of a knife may have also been strategic. They were in a public, outdoor setting where gunshots could draw attention. A knife was quieter, deadlier, and more intimate. Despite the inconsistencies, many experts agree that Lake Berryessa was likely the work of the Zodiac. The physical description of the suspect, his voice, the post-attack phone call, and the handwriting on the car all point to the same man. A copycat would have needed to match his appearance, forge his distinctive handwriting, and master the Zodiac's psychological profile, all highly unlikely. The case of Arthur Lee Allen detectives were flooded with tips throughout the investigations, some credible, most not. One name would eventually stand out: Arthur Lee Allen. On October 6, 1969, just over a week after the Lake Berryessa attack, Detective John Lynch visited Elmer Cave Elementary School to interview Allen. When asked where he was during the attack, Allen claimed he had been skin diving at Salt Point Ranch, a location roughly 100 miles away. The interview didn't immediately raise suspicion, but over time, Allen's odd behavior and background began to raise red flags. He was known to own multiple handguns, often kept one in his car, and seemed to enjoy the attention surrounding the Zodiac case. After the interview, he even bragged that he had been considered a suspect. Allen would remain a person of interest for the rest of his life. The very next day, October 7th, a letter arrived at the Vallejo Police Department, addressed to Sergeant John Lynch. It was postmarked from San Mateo and signed only "A Good Citizen." Years later, investigators rediscovered this card. In a handwritten note, Lynch had summarized the message. The writer claimed to possess extrasensory perception, or ESP. While in a trance-like state, they said their hand involuntarily wrote a message that included the address 56 Beach Street and the name Jerry. But this bizarre tip went nowhere, and no meaningful connection to the Zodiac was ever made. The murder of Paul Stein just 2 weeks later, the Zodiac would strike again, this time in the heart of San Francisco. On October 11th, 1969, 29, cab driver Paul Stein picked up a passenger at Mason and Geary Streets, near Union Square. The destination was written in Stein's logbook: Washington and Maple Streets, in the upscale neighborhood of Presidio Heights. But as the cab pulled up to the corner of Washington and Cherry, just 1 block short of the destination, the passenger pulled out a gun and shot Stein in the head at point-blank range. Witnesses, a group of teenage siblings, watched in horror from the second floor of 3899 Washington Street. Directly across from the scene, they saw the killer remove Stein's wallet and car keys, then cut away a large square from the back of Stein's shirt, dipping it into the blood before walking away. At 9:58 p.m., the teenagers called police. They described a white male suspect, but a critical error occurred. the police dispatcher broadcast the suspect description incorrectly. They said officers should look for a black male adult. As a result, when patrol officers Eric Zelms and Donald Falk encountered a stocky white man walking east on Jackson Street, just blocks away, they didn't stop him. By the time the description was corrected, the killer had vanished. Investigators believe he likely had a vehicle waiting nearby. In his later report, Officer Falk described the man as white male adult, 35 to 45 years old, approximately 5 feet 10, 180 to 200 pounds, barrel-chested with light-colored hair, possibly graying at the back. He wore brown, baggy pleated pants and a zip-up jacket with elastic cuffs and waistband. His walk was hunched, his head slightly forward. The man appeared calm, unhurried, simply walking away into the night. The Zodiac Killer, Part 5. The Stein murder and a terrifying shift as patrolmen continued down Argello Street. They received an update. The suspect was now described as a white male adult. Realizing the man they'd seen just moments before on Jackson Street might be involved, they doubled back and entered the Presidio, searching around West Pacific Avenue, the direction they'd seen the suspect heading. But he was gone. In his book Zodiac, Robert Graysmith claimed the officers may have spoken to the man, asking whether he had seen anything unusual. However, no such exchange is documented in the official police reports. The only reference to this comes from a Zodiac letter in which the killer himself claims to have conversed with the officers before walking away. If true, it would mark one of the most critical failures in the San Francisco Police Department's history, missing the killer. Immediately after a murder, forensics at the crime scene, forensic technicians recovered multiple usable prints, 30 fingerprints, 3 palm prints, and 1 smudge believed to be a lower palm or finger impression. One particularly promising print was found on the passenger side door handle, possibly left by the killer. However, it's also possible that it came from a police officer or forensic worker. Some bloody prints were also recovered, believed to belong to the suspect, but none were clear enough for identification. None matched any profiles in the FBI's National Crime Identification Database. Inside the cab, detectives found a pair of leather gloves, size 7. Their origin was never confirmed. Were they the killers, or left behind by someone else? Early ballistics misidentified the bullet as a .38 caliber, but later tests confirmed it to be a 9mm, matching the ammunition used in the Blue Rock Springs attack on July 4th, 1969. With the Zodiac now active inside city limits, the San Francisco Police Department reassigned 2 of its best investigators to the case, Bill Armstrong and the now iconic Inspector Dave Toschi. The letter and the bloody trophy. 2 days later, the San Francisco Chronicle received another Zodiac letter. The envelope bore the killer's familiar cross-circle insignia, where a return address should have been. Inside was a chilling note: "Please rush to editor." Alongside it was a blood-soaked scrap of Paul Stein's shirt, the same one that had been cut away by the killer after the murder. Forensic testing confirmed the origin of the material. Over the following months, the Zodiac would send 2 more swatches of Stein's shirt, though roughly 104 square inches of fabric remain unaccounted for, likely kept by the killer as a trophy. 3 fingerprints were lifted from this letter as well, but again, they've never been matched to any known suspect. A new pattern and a disturbing threat in this latest letter. The Zodiac claimed responsibility not only for Paul Stein's murder, but also for his previous attacks, including the Lake Berryessa stabbings. He also made a chilling new threat. This is the Zodiac speaking. "I am the murderer of the taxi driver over by Washington St. plus Maple St. last night. To prove this, here is a blood-stained piece of his shirt. I am the same man who did in the people in the North Bay area. The SFPD could have caught me last night if they had searched the park properly, instead of holding road races with their motorcycles. School children make nice targets. I think I shall wipe out a school bus some morning, just shoot out the front tire and pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out. The Paul Stine murder marked a dramatic shift in the killer's behavior. Until now, he had exclusively targeted young couples, usually at night, in isolated areas. But this time, he had murdered a lone adult in the heart of San Francisco on a Saturday night. Suddenly, no one felt safe. The Zodiac's claim that he would target school buses sparked widespread panic. The Chronicle initially chose to suppress the threat, fearing public hysteria. But within a week, the full letter and a composite sketch, based on witness descriptions, were released to the public. A national obsession, the Zodiac case was now front-page news across the country. Police departments up and down the West Coast began re-examining their cold cases, wondering if this mysterious figure might be responsible for unsolved murders in their own jurisdictions. The chief of Riverside Police, King Ked, sent a detailed 3-page report on the unsolved murder of Sherry Jo Bates, 2 law enforcement agencies in Solano, Napa, and San Francisco counties. That file would mysteriously disappear for over a year. The call to the TV show. At 2 a.m. on October 20th, 1969, another strange twist unfolded. A man claiming to be the Zodiac called the Oakland Police Department, demanding that a prominent attorney appear on live television. The caller insisted that either F. Lee Bailey or Melvin Belly appear on AM San Francisco, a local talk show hosted by Jim Dunbar. Bailey was unavailable, but Belly agreed to the request. Later that morning, the show aired. Dunbar took calls on the air, asking the mysterious caller to speak. After several attempts, a man identifying himself as Sam finally got through. In a soft, nervous voice, he said he needed help, but refused to identify himself. When asked why, he replied, "I don't want to go to the gas chamber." Over the course of 20 minutes and 13 brief calls, the man avoided giving clear answers. He hung up frequently and never stayed on the line long enough to allow a trace. Eventually, Belly convinced Sam to meet him at a storefront in Daly City. Police set up a surveillance operation, but the caller never showed. Eventually, investigators traced the calls to Eric while a patient at a mental institution. Decades later, in December 2020, when the Zodiac's 340-character cipher was finally decoded, it included a line that read, "That wasn't me on the TV show." Whoever called Belly that date wasn't the Zodiac. The case widens. In early November 1969, just weeks after the Paul Stine murder, the Zodiac sent another letter. The contents would escalate the fear, taunt the police, and deepen the mystery. The dripping pen card and the 340 cipher A's with previous letters. The envelope bore double postage and the familiar instruction, "Please rush to editor." Inside was a Jester brand greeting card, showing a cartoon pen dripping ink. Alongside the message, "Sorry I haven't written, but I just washed my pen." Inside the card, the message continued, ... and I can't do a thing with it. Accompanying the card was a long, 340-character cryptogram, handwritten in the Zodiac's distinctive and erratic style, with the usual array of misspellings and taunts. This letter marked the first time the killer included what appeared to be a body count, keeping track of how many victims are, as he called them, slaves he had claimed. But there was a problem. The Zodiac listed 7 victims, even though authorities had only confirmed 6 up to that point. This discrepancy confused investigators. The letter may have also contained another bloody swatch from Paul Stine's shirt, though it remains uncertain whether that was included with this letter or the one that followed. The Zodiac added a chilling postscript. Day equals July, August. September, October equals 7. I thought you'd need a good laugh before you get the bad news. You won't get the news for a while yet. P.S. Could you print this new cipher on your front page? I get awfully lonely when I am ignored. So lonely I could do my thing. The bus bomb letter just days later, on November 9th, 1969. Another letter. was delivered to the San Francisco Chronicle. It arrived the same day as the dripping pen card. Both were copied and forwarded to law enforcement. This new letter was longer and accompanied by a hand-drawn schematic of a homemade device, the Zodiac referred to as a death machine. He claimed it was designed to detonate beneath a school bus, triggered by the vehicle's weight as it passed over. A source within the SFPD later revealed that latent fingerprints might have been recovered from the letter, but if so, nothing definitive was ever made public. The 340-character cryptogram remained unsolved for over 51 years, its contents unknown until it was finally deciphered in December 2020. As for the 5 X's sometimes included in the Zodiac's signature symbol, some speculate they represent the number of victims, though this has never been confirmed. The death machine schematic wasn't released to the public until 1996, when it was published online by Michael Morford and Douglas Oswell. A holiday message to Melvin Bellion, December 20th, 1969. The Zodiac sent a Christmas card this time, addressed to attorney Melvin Belli, who had previously appeared on Jim Dunbar, San Francisco during the infamous hoax phone call. The card was delivered to Belli's law office and opened by his secretary. Inside was another letter, along with yet another swatch of Paul Stein's bloody shirt confirming its authenticity. On the back of the envelope were the words, "Merry's Christmas plus New Year." The content of the letter was presented as a plea for help, though many believe it was too carefully constructed to be a genuine emotional appeal. The Zodiac's usual handwriting style was notably altered, though traces of his typical script returned toward the end of the letter. The killer also alluded to an 8th victim and warned that he would claim a 9th and 10th if help didn't come. Despite the dramatic gesture, this was the last known communication the Zodiac ever sent to Melvin Belli, despite Belli's later attempts to engage him through public events. With that, 1969 ended, and the Zodiac went silent, at least publicly, for nearly 3 months. 1970. The hunt expands. By early 1970, investigators were growing increasingly desperate to connect the Zodiac to other unclaimed crimes. Though he claimed 8 victims, many suspected the real number could be much higher. One journalist leading the charge was Paul Avery of the San Francisco Chronicle. Avery had reported on the case since the beginning, and by early 1970, he was actively digging into the 1966 Riverside murder of Sherry Jo Bates, suspecting the Zodiac might be behind it. There were striking similarities, taunting letters, a female victim, and a cryptic tone. But there were also major differences. Riverside Police Captain Irvin Cross publicly expressed doubts that the Zodiac was involved. While some saw undeniable links, others believed it was a different killer with a similar mindset. Although the Zodiac never definitively claimed Bates as a victim, he would later allude to Riverside activity in a future letter. However, it's widely accepted that the Zodiac occasionally took credit for crimes he didn't commit, which further muddies the waters. The terrifying case of Kathleen Johnston came. A chilling encounter on March 22, 1970. At around 7 p.m., 23-year-old Kathleen Johns was driving through San Joaquin County with her infant daughter Jennifer, heading west on Highway 132. A man in a light-colored American-made car began honking and flashing his lights, eventually pulling alongside her and shouting that her rear wheel was loose. He offered to help. Johns pulled over at a turnoff near Bird Road, just west of Interstate 5. The man retrieved a lug wrench and knelt beside her car, appearing to tighten the nuts on the back wheel. But in reality, he removed them completely. Moments later, as she drove off, the wheel fell off entirely. The man reappeared and again offered to help, this time by giving her and her baby a ride to the nearest gas station. Reluctantly, Johns agreed. She sat in the front seat with her daughter, unaware she was about to endure a terrifying tour ordeal. Instead of heading directly to help, the man drove aimlessly through the area, bypassing multiple open service stations. When Johns asked why they didn't stop, he replied cryptically. "They're not the right ones." The conversation grew increasingly eerie. When she asked if he often helped stranded motorists, he replied, "By the time I get through with them, they don't need help." Growing terrified, Kathleen realized he had no intention of helping her at all. Eventually, the car slowed near a stop sign and, in a split-second decision, Kathleen grabbed her child, threw open the door, and leaped out of the moving car, disappearing into the darkness of a nearby field. The man stopped and turned off his headlights. For several minutes, he waited silently, watching, hoping she'd make another move. Then, he turned the headlights back on and drove away. Kathleen Johns and her baby were soon rescued by a passing motorist, who took them to the nearby police station in Patterson, which she would soon discover sent chills through the entire investigative team. Kathleen Johns identifies the Zodiac. At the local Patterson police station, Kathleen Johns waited quietly to give her statement. But then, something chilling happened. As she glanced around the room, her eyes locked on a wanted poster pinned to the wall. It showed a composite sketch of the Zodiac killer, and she immediately recognized the face staring back at her as the very man who had terrorized her and her infant daughter. The desk sergeant, visibly alarmed, instructed Johns to wait alone at a nearby cafe while officers attempted to recover her vehicle. A radio broadcast was sent out with the last known location. It wasn't long before a Stanislaus County Sheriff's deputy located the car, but it was completely burned out, still smoldering. It appeared the man had returned to torch the vehicle, likely in an attempt to destroy any remaining evidence. Both the San Francisco Examiner and Modesto Bee would go on to publish accounts of Kathleen Johns' harrowing experience, reports that matched the details she gave to law enforcement. A few months later, journalist Paul Avery published a feature in the Chronicle, and this version is generally accepted as the most accurate. However, over the years, Johns gave inconsistent versions of the story and even misidentified multiple men as her attacker. She later admitted her memory had become unreliable, even failing to recall whether she had been legally married at the time. Still, the abduction of Kathleen Johns is believed to be the last confirmed sighting of the Zodiac killer, though his taunting letters would continue for some time, each one boasting a rising victim, many of which could never be verified by authorities. The murder of Robert Salem in a letter dated November 9, 1969. The Zodiac had ominously warned, "When I commit my murders, they shall look like routine robberies, killings of anger, plus a few fake accidents." It was a message that opened the door to countless possibilities. How many crimes might he have committed that were never even recognized as his work? On April 19, 1970, the body of Robert Salem, a 40-year-old designer, was found in his upscale San Francisco apartment. He had been brutally stabbed multiple times with a long-bladed knife. His killer had attempted to decapitate him, and when that failed, cut off his left ear and took it from the scene. Blood was used to paint the walls of his home, with slogans, "Satan saves," and, disturbingly, "Zodiac," though Salem was believed to have been killed on April 15th. His body wasn't discovered until days later. Then, in July, Tim Instonley, Dean Baker, and Harry Allen were arrested after a car accident. Shockingly, they were found carrying human remains, which they claimed belonged to a missing man named James Michael Schlosser. Baker went on to confess to the murder of Robert Salem, claiming it was a ritual killing ordered by the leader of a satanic cult known as the Grand Changwan. Despite his confession, Baker was never charged with Salem's murder. The case remains officially unsolved. Many suspected that the bloody slogans were meant to stoke fear during the already intense Manson trial atmosphere, though Baker was in the Bay Area during the murder. The Zodiac connection was never conclusively proven. April 1970. A new cipher and bomb threat. The next Zodiac letter arrived on April 20th, 1970, addressed to the San Francisco Chronicle editor. Inside was a new, smaller cipher, just 13 symbols long, which the Zodiac claimed contained his real name. Alongside it was a diagram of a modified bus bomb. The letter began with the chilling signature, "This is the Zodiac speaking," and continued, "By the way, have you cracked the last cipher I sent you? My name is... I am mildly curious how much money you have on my head now. I hope you don't think I was the one who wiped out that blue meanie at the cop station, even though I talked about killing school children with one." He added, "There is more glory in killing a cop than a Sid, because a cop can shoot back. I have killed 10 people to date. It would have been a lot more, except my bus bomb was a dud. I was swamped out by the rain." A detailed bus bomb schematic followed, complete with hand-drawn labels. He concluded, "P.S. I hope you have fun trying to figure out who I killed. Cross Circle 10 SFPD 0. The 13 symbol cipher remains unsolved to this day, though some amateur sleuths believe it contains clues to his identity." The phrase "blue meanie" was likely a reference to the villains from the Beatles, yellow submarine slang for police officers at the time. By this point, the Zodiac had claimed 10 victims, though police could only confirm 5. The Zodiac demands a button then, on April 28, 1970. Another message arrived, this time sent on a Jolly Roger branded greeting card. The cover featured a cartoon of a prospector riding a dragon with the message, "Sorry to hear your ass is a dragon." On the back of the card, the Zodiac scrawled, "I hope you enjoy yourselves when I have my blast." But inside was the real message. "If you don't want me to have this blast, you must do 2 things. Tell everyone about the bus bomb with all the details. I want to see some nice Zodiac buttons worn around town. Everyone else has buttons peace symbols, Black Power, Melvin eats blubber, etc. It would cheer me up considerably if I saw a lot of people wearing my button. Please no nasty ones like Melvin's. Thank you." This letter broke form from previous communications. For the first time, the Zodiac did not begin with the phrase, "This is the Zodiac speaking." The Zodiac button demand became a running theme in future letters. Authorities later reported they had found latent fingerprints on both the card and the envelope, though it's unclear if they were left by the killer or postal staff. The bus bomb threat was finally revealed to the public the next day, April 29, 1970. However, the Zodiac's actual bomb schematics would not be published until 1986, in Robert Graysmith's book, Zodiac, The Diablo Map Cipher, on June 26, 1970. The killer struck again this time, sending a letter to the Chronicle that included another cipher, a Phillips 66 road map of the Bay Area, and a new kind of clue. The map was annotated with a custom clock face, a cross-circle symbol centered over the summit of Mount Diablo. Numbers were scrawled at key compass points, 0 at the top, 6 at the bottom, 3 on the right, and 9 on the left. Next to the symbol was a cryptic note. The 0 is to be set to magnetic north. It was clear the Zodiac had returned to his original style with the trademark opening line, handwritten cipher, and allusions to future attacks. "This is the Zodiac speaking. A new confession and cryptic threat." New letter arrived. The familiar, chilling greeting was at the top. "This is the Zodiac speaking." In this latest message, the killer expressed anger toward the residents of the San Francisco Bay Area. Why? Because, he claimed, they had failed to wear the Zodiac-themed buttons he had previously requested, and in his own words, he had planned to retaliate. "I promised to punish them by annihilating a full school bus, but now school is out for the summer, so I punished them in another way. I shot a man sitting in a parked car with a .38. He concluded ominously, "Cross Circle 12, SFPD 0. The killer was now claiming 12 victims, and he suggested that the map and cipher he had provided would reveal the location of a hidden bomb, which the authorities had until fall to uncover. But behind the letter, a dark reality was unfolding.
6 days before the note was mailed, SFPD Officer Richard Radetich was gunned down in his patrol car while writing a traffic ticket. He had been shot with a .38 caliber revolver, just as described by the Zodiac. Even more suspiciously, the murder occurred only 450 feet from the home of Rick Marshall, a known Zodiac suspect who lived at 143 Scott Street. Was this a true confession or another manipulation? Soon after, a witness identified the actual shooter as Joseph Wesley Johnson, a black ex-convict who bore no resemblance to any known Zodiac descriptions. The SFPD concluded that the Zodiac had falsely claimed responsibility, likely after learning that a suspect had already been identified. For many, it was a clear tactic to reignite public fear and remain in the headlines. Could the Zodiac returns to Kathleen Johns on July 24, 1970. A short note arrived at the Chronicle. It referred to a victim from earlier that year. "This is the Zodiac speaking. I am rather unhappy because you people will not wear some nice cross-circle buttons, so I now have a little list, starting with that woman and her baby that I gave a rather interesting ride for a couple hours one evening that ended in my burning her car where I found them." This message appeared to confirm the Zodiac's involvement in the kidnapping of Kathleen Johns, a woman who had previously claimed that she and her infant daughter were abducted by the Zodiac on a lonely highway. Only one local newspaper, the Modesto Bee, had reported that her car had been set on fire, a detail never made public elsewhere. This added weight to the Zodiac's claim. Torture in the afterlife. The Little List letter. 3 days later, on July 27th, another letter arrived, longer, more grotesque, and filled with disturbing imagery. Once again, the Zodiac lamented the public's refusal to wear his buttons. "Since you will not wear nice cross-circle buttons, perhaps you will wear some nasty cross-Susie buttons." He then unleashed a dark fantasy. "If you do not, I shall torture all 13 of my slaves that I have waiting for me in paradise." What followed was a graphic list of imagined tortures: anthills, pine splinters under fingernails, skinning victims alive, and even making billiard players compete in the dark with crooked cues and twisted shoes. Attached to this grotesque letter was a parody of the song "I've Got a Little List" from Gilbert and Sullivan's The Mikado. The Zodiac's version detailed people he claimed the world wouldn't miss, including banjo players, people who shake hands improperly, girls who never kissed, and vague figures like "that nice old priest" and "watch his name." This twisted poem was also interpreted as a coded threat list, and it included a reference to the still unsolved 32-character cipher from his June letter, claiming it was part of his plan to reveal the location of a bomb. October 1970. The postcard and the Halloween card. After months of silence, the Zodiac resurfaced, this time with 2 postcards. The first, postmarked October 5th, arrived at the Chronicle. It was a collage of words and letters cut from newspapers and magazines and had 13 holes punched along one edge. The cryptic note read, "Dear Editor, you'll hate me, but I've got to tell you, the pace isn't any slower. In fact, it's just one big 13. Some of them thought it was horrible. P.S. There are reports city pig cops are closing in on me. F.K., I'm crack-proof. What is the price tag now?" At first, investigators dismissed it as a hoax, but soon they reconsidered. The reference to 13 victims was a detail not yet made public. Additionally, phrases from this card, such as crack-proof, would reappear in later confirmed Zodiac letters. The Halloween card to Paul Avery. Then, on October 27, 1970, a Halloween card arrived at the Chronicle. This one was personally addressed to reporter Paul Avery, though misspelled as Averly. The envelope bore a strange V-shaped symbol with 4 dots, and inside was a hand-decorated greeting card. The front depicted a skeleton holding a jack-o'-lantern captioned, "From your secret, pal. I feel it in my bones. You ache to know my name." On the left side, the Zodiac had scrawled paradise and slaves in a cross formation. At each corner of the card were handwritten methods of death: by fire, by gun, by knife, by rope. On the back was a disturbing drawing of a tree surrounded by 13 staring eyes, one of which was marked with the message, "Peekaboo, you are doomed." Beneath a second skeleton, he had written 14. But then why spoil the game? At the legs of the skeleton was a final eerie greeting: "Happy Halloween." The same strange symbol from the envelope was also drawn again on the card, alongside the classic Zodiac cross circle emblem. Hook at another Halloween card, Kathleen Johns. The woman abducted earlier that year later claimed she had also received a similar Halloween card from the Zodiac around the same time. She said she forwarded the card to Paul Avery. However, no evidence of a second Halloween card has ever surfaced in any official investigation or Zodiac-related publication. The message, "Peekaboo, you are doomed," was interpreted as a direct threat to Avery, and the Chronicle took it seriously. On October 31st, the newspaper published a front-page story about the card, which triggered a wave of public interest and tips. Among the responses was a curious anonymous letter from someone in Riverside. To Led from Riverside. The letter urged Paul Avery to investigate a potential link between the Zodiac and the unsolved murder of Sherry Jo Bates, a young woman killed in Riverside on October 30th, 1966. The message read, "Please forward this to the detective in charge of the Zodiac case. A few years ago in Riverside, California, a young girl was murdered, just about on Halloween. I could write a longer letter citing the similarities between Zodiac's case and this murder, but if the police cannot see them, then I'll take a slow boat to China." Author Robert Graysmith would later publish the full letter in his book Zodiac, keeping alive the theory that Sherry Jo Bates might have been the Zodiac's first known victim. The Riverside letter and a forgotten connection. Not long after the infamous Halloween card reached Chronicle reporter Paul Avery, a curious anonymous letter arrived, postmarked from Riverside, California. The sender urged Avery to investigate a possible link between the Zodiac and an unsolved 1966 murder. If the police haven't looked into this, they should. Letters to newspapers, erratic printing, strange phrasing. Look into it, Mr. Avery, and give Captain Cross a call. He knows I don't quit. I'll call you soon. The writer pointed to the brutal stabbing of 18-year-old Sherry Jo Bates, who had been murdered on October 30th, 1966, just outside the Riverside City College library. Avery took the tip seriously. He traveled to Riverside and reviewed their files, where he unearthed a 1-year-old letter from the Riverside police chief to a Napa County detective suggesting strong similarities between the Bates case and the Zodiac's Bay Area crimes. Avery's investigation found that several anonymous letters, allegedly written by the Bates killer, bore the same strange style and even featured a Z as a signature. On Avery's insistence, a multi-agency meeting was arranged. Detectives from San Francisco, Solano, and Napa counties met with Riverside Police to compare notes. SFPD Inspector Bill Armstrong believed the connection was strong, and state handwriting expert Sherwood Merrill even concluded that the writing in the Bates case matched that of the Zodiac letters. But the Riverside detectives were less convinced. They pointed to the extreme overkill. Bates had been stabbed repeatedly, something not publicly known and far more frenzied than Zodiac's usual calculated approach. Some suspected the murder was personal or driven by rage, very different from the Zodiac's detached pattern. Still, Avery published his story on November 16, 1970, suggesting that the Zodiac's first known victim may have been Sherry Jo Bates. A cold case from Gaviota Beach. Around the same time, another cold case drew attention. The 1963 murders of Robert Domingos, 18, and Linda Edwards, 17. A young couple shot dead while skipping school for a beach day at Gaviota Beach near Santa Barbara. Detective Bill Baker of the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department had recently reopened the case. After circulating a teletype press release to other departments, he was contacted by Inspector Bill Armstrong of the SFPD, who expressed suspicion that the Zodiac might be responsible. Robert and Linda had been shot multiple times. Robert 11 times, Linda 8, with a .22 caliber weapon. Their killer attempted to set fire to their bodies in a makeshift shack nearby, possibly to destroy evidence. There were notable similarities to the Lake Berryessa attack. A secluded location, a young couple, pre-cut rope used to bind the victims, a firearm similar in caliber. An attempted execution when the victims resisted. Investigators believed the killer had ordered Linda to tie up Robert, and when Robert broke free, he was gunned down alongside her. But there were also key differences. The Zodiac had never stayed at his crime scenes long enough to attempt cleanup or arson, and he had never claimed responsibility for the Gaviota Beach murders, unlike his other crimes, which he often boasted about publicly. If the murders of Robert and Linda were the Zodiac's work, they might represent his earliest known killings, but doubt remains. Other suspected early murders, several other unsolved homicides have been tentatively connected to the Zodiac, though none with conclusive proof. The 1960 murders of Larry Payton and Beverly Allen in Oregon shared characteristics of a Zodiac attack. 3 men were arrested, 2 convicted, but their guilt remains questioned to this day. Some have proposed that the crime was committed by Edward Wayne Edwards, a serial killer and theorized Zodiac suspect. However, law enforcement has never considered Edwards a viable lead in the Zodiac case. Darty. March 22, 1971, the Zodiac breaks his silence. After nearly 5 months of eerie silence, a new letter appeared, but this time it was not addressed to the Chronicle. It was sent to the Los Angeles Times, the first time the Zodiac had reached out to a media outlet outside the Bay Area. And for the first time, the letter was postmarked from Pleasanton, a city about 15 miles east of San Francisco. Inside was the same terrifying introduction. "This is the Zodiac speaking." The letter read, "Like I've always said, I'm crack-proof. If the blue meanies are ever going to catch me, they better get off their fat asses. The Zodiac's final messages In a letter postmarked March 22nd, 1971, the Zodiac wrote once again, "The longer they fiddle and fart around, the more slaves I will collect for my afterlife. I'll give them some credit. They've finally stumbled onto my riverside activity, but they're only scratching the surface. There are a hell of a lot more down there." He added, "I'm writing to the Los Angeles Times because they don't bury me on the back pages like some of the others." While some believed the letter was authentic, others weren't so sure. Riverside Police Detective Mike Butterfield suggested the letter might have been written by the same person who had anonymously sent Paul Avery the October 1970 postcard, connecting the Zodiac to the Riverside murder of Sherry Jo Bates. Even SFPD Inspector Dave Toschi, one of the lead Zodiac investigators, was at one point suspected of forging the letter, possibly to reignite interest in the stalled case, but no evidence ever confirmed this theory, and the letter remains officially attributed to the Zodiac. On the last postcard, just 1 week later, on March 29, 1971, another postcard surfaced, but this one never made it to its intended destination. It was intercepted by a sharp-eyed postal worker who recognized its familiar style. The envelope bore the name of Paul Avery, misspelled once again as Averly, with no return address. Instead, the Zodiac had pasted cutouts from various newspapers, the Chronicle, the Times, and the San Francisco Examiner. Alongside these were his signature cross-circle symbol drawn in the corner and punched through with a hole. The rest of the postcard was covered in holes along the edges, punched out with a hole puncher. But what really caught investigators' attention was the photograph of the Sierra Club condominium complex near Incline Village at Lake Tahoe, an image that had appeared in a newspaper ad just days earlier. Typed across the card were the cryptic phrases, "Sought victim 12, peeked through the pines, around in the snow." In the bottom right corner, the Zodiac's signature symbol. The meaning of the Lake Tahoe postcard has never been fully explained. While the handwriting, spelling mistakes, and symbolism were consistent with previous Zodiac messages, some experts questioned its authenticity. But the disappearance of Donna Lass. The Lake Tahoe postcard seemed to suggest that the Zodiac had claimed a new victim, Donna Lass, a 25-year-old nurse who vanished on September 6, 1970, after finishing her night shift at the Sahara Tahoe Casino. Donna, who had previously worked at the Letterman General Hospital in the Presidio, was last seen around 2 a.m. Her car was later found at her apartment complex, but no one saw her leave work. The next day, someone called both her landlord and employer, claiming she had a family emergency and wouldn't be returning. The call was a hoax. Donna never came home. Her case was eventually linked to the Zodiac, due in part to her San Francisco connections and the chilling phrases on the postcard. But no evidence ever confirmed the Zodiac was responsible. Her body has never been found. One suspect, Lawrence Kane, was later identified by Kathleen Johns as the man who had abducted her and her baby in 1970. Kane also lived near the Paul Stein murder scene and was suspected in the murder of Dana Lowell in 1974. Still, no conclusive link tied him to Donna Lass or the Zodiac. And in 1999, a former investigator came forward and claimed he had forged the postcard. Whether that's true or not remains a mystery. Zodiac fever hits Hollywood. just a month after the March postcard on April 7, 1971, a film titled The Zodiac Killer premiered in San Francisco. Starring Hal Reed and Bob Jones, the low-budget thriller was a sensationalized and fictional take on the real crimes. Interestingly, the movie's creators hatched a bizarre plan to catch the real Zodiac. During the premiere at the RKO Golden Gate Theater, audience members were asked to fill out a card completing the sentence, "I think the Zodiac kills because..." The twist? A man hidden inside the collection box compared the handwriting on each card to samples from the real Zodiac letters. Meanwhile, actors dressed as goons waited nearby, ready to pounce on anyone whose writing matched. Needless to say, the Zodiac wasn't caught that night. Dirty Harry. The Zodiac's cinematic shadow. Later that year, on December 23, 1971, Clint Eastwood starred in Dirty Harry, a gritty crime thriller inspired in part by the Zodiac case. The film's villain, Scorpio, bore striking similarities to the Zodiac. He taunted police with letters, demanded ransom, and even threatened to hijack a school bus, a chilling nod to Zodiac's threats. The film was set in San Francisco, and Scorpio's persona, disturbed, calculating, egomaniacal, was clearly modeled after the real-life killer. Screenwriters R.M. Fink and Harry Julian Fink later revealed that Inspector Dave Toschi, the real-life Zodiac investigator, was the inspiration for Eastwood's iconic character, Harry Callahan. Dedekok, the interrogation of Arthur Lee Allen. On August 4, 1971, SFPD detectives Tashi Armstrong and Mulholland finally confronted one of their most notorious suspects, Arthur Lee Allen. He was approached at his workplace after an informant came forward, claiming that Allen had spoken in detail about killing people and using the Zodiac name as early as January 1968, before the letters even began. The interview would set the stage for one of the most controversial and debated chapters in the Zodiac investigation. When police first found Yoshiyuki Oide dead in a sealed room beside a burning charcoal stove, it appeared to be a tragic suicide. But something didn't sit right. Oide had just returned from a trip with his fiancée, and his blog, filled with hopeful entries, showed no signs of despair. Far from a man ready to end his life, he sounded like someone planning a future. The scene was clean, too clean, and his alleged farewell came with no note. Investigators took a closer look at the people in his life. One name rose quickly to the surface: Kanai Kojima. Cue low, pulsing background music. Before his death, Oide had transferred roughly $35,000 to Kojima's account. Not unusual between engaged partners, until police discovered this. The charcoal and stove used in his suicide had actually been purchased by Kojima herself. When questioned, she admitted buying the items, but claimed she did it as a favor. Still, something about her story didn't add up. Then, investigators uncovered something chilling. Oide wasn't Kojima's first tragic fiancée. Police connected two previous deaths to Kojima: Takata, age 53, and Kenzo Ando, 80. Both men died in eerily similar ways: carbon monoxide poisoning in sealed rooms shortly after becoming involved with Kojima. The deeper the police dug, the darker the picture became. Each of these men had known Kanai Kojima. Each had died quietly, unexpectedly. Each had transferred large sums of money to her. And in every case, Kojima was the last person to see them alive. Autopsies revealed another pattern: traces of sleeping pills in the victim's systems.